Architectural engineering, also known as building engineering, is the application of engineering principles and technology to building design and construction. Architectural engineering involves the analysis and design of physical objects, buildings, bridges, equipment supports, towers and walls, etc. Those concentrating on buildings are responsible for the structural performance of a large part of the built environment and are sometimes informally referred to as building engineers. Architectural engineers require expertise in strength of materials and in the seismic design of structures covered by earthquake engineering. Architectural engineers sometimes practice structural as one aspect of their designs. The structural discipline, when practiced as a specialty, works closely with architects and other engineering specialists. In some countries, the practice of architecture includes planning, designing, and overseeing the building's construction, and architecture, as a profession providing architectural services, is referred to as architectural engineering. In Japan, a first-class architect plays the dual role of architect and building engineer, although the services of a licensed structural design first-class architect are required for buildings over a certain scale. Architects may envision a building's design, but architectural engineers make these visions and plans come true by applying knowledge of engineering forms, ventilation, lighting, structural systems, and building codes. Architectural engineering is a challenging career field that requires a strong grasp of calculus, geometry, and physics. However, the field of architectural engineering isn't all just numbers and computations. Students also usually must learn about art, design, history, and the humanities, subjects that help them understand architecture on a broad basis and facilitate communication with other professionals, including lead architects. Architectural engineers must complete a bachelor's degree program, which generally lasts 5 years. Some 5-year programs also award a master's degree along with the bachelor's upon program completion. Typical architectural engineering coursework in a bachelor's degree program covers construction materials and methods, CAD, design analysis, and modern structural systems. Architectural engineering degree candidates spend a significant amount of time in designs and labs. Engineers who offer their services directly to the public must be licensed as professional engineers. To become licensed, aspiring PEs usually must pass 2 exams administered by the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying. The first exam is the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, which can be taken by a student about to graduate from an engineering program. After 4 years of work experience, individuals may sit for the Principles and Practice of Engineering exam to attain full licensure. Continuing education may be necessary for licensure maintenance, but requirements vary between states.
I went to college initially for forestry, then landscape architecture, then transferred to another school and studied architecture via an urban planning degree. I took interdisciplinary classes, including some liberal arts core, some civil engineering classes, some architectural history classes, and some design classes. The highest level of math I took at the time was Calculus 2, and there were many types of non-traditional classes that were required to take. The university I went to had a liberal arts core curriculum, and I thought it was sort of silly at the time, but at the end of the day I think they were pretty useful as far as the skills and my approach to work today. During college I worked full-time for 3 years at an architecture firm. I also did internships at a historic preservation agency and also an affordable housing innovation think tank. My first architecture job was during college, and my role model in the field was the gent I was working for, a guy named Bill Selvage, and he owned the firm and mentored me along the way. I went to grad school for architecture, and it was a 3-year program full of lots of design, theory, technology type classes on the for my for my optional classes. I took a lot of business and real estate development classes at the business school, and I learned a lot of good skills in grad school, probably more than the people who did straight up architecture. Yes, I learned how to design and how to think like an architect, but I also learned business skills that I use today. I got a master's in architecture degree, and my first job out of grad school was at a big architecture firm in New York called Cohn Pedersen Fox, where my responsibilities were as a kind of intern architect designer. It didn't pay very much at the time. This is back in 1990. There was a big recession. It was hard to find my first job. I think it paid about $35,000 a year. And I worked on one project there. It was the federal courthouse at Foley Square, a 750,000 square foot, 50-story tall building. And I think some of the difficulties with the profession had to do with how young architects are kind of brought into the profession. So I spent a majority of my time detailing the core of the building, where the elevators are, where the mechanical rooms are, and coordinating with other engineers on the project. So where there are bathrooms, where there are elevator cores, where there are mechanical rooms, where there are technology rooms in the core of the building, I was responsible for coordinating with the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer, with the elevator consultant, with the tel data engineer. And that's not great work. You go into architecture thinking you're going to design big shiny glass buildings, and it's a little frustrating to start with the nuts and bolts on the inside of the building. My average day, was more or less a 10-hour workday. Show up at 8 or 9, work until 6 or 7. We had a studio format, and you got pretty close with the people in your studio. We all worked together. Most of the time we had lunch together, went out and cocktailed after work together. And a lot of, what constraints did I have to work with? That type of work is very constrained. You're constrained to the inside of the building, to very specific tasks. And it's not sexy design, it's nuts and bolts coordination. Coolest buildings in the world, in my opinion, are buildings where the form and the use, or excuse me, where the structure and the use of the building are expressed, are expressed. And so the modernists say form follows function. So I guess it's sort of along those lines. And more specifically, I think the coolest building in the world are things like Scandinavian stave churches, New England barns, and some modernist buildings. So I like to be able to see what is holding the building up. I like to see the structure expressed in the building. That being said, probably the coolest building in the world, in my opinion, is the Guggenheim Museum in Spain, and that's just over the top.